It's a relatively quiet start to the week based on, that kind of rapid succession of winter weather that we've been dealing with anywhere, across the continental U.S., especially kind of eastern two-thirds. Just like Sunday morning, Monday morning, we had the historic record cold temperatures down into portions of Florida. We saw like social media pictures of like falling frozen iguanas, what have you. Before that, obviously the Carolina snowstorm, and then the week before that, obviously the wide swath of snow that stretched all the way from Texas up into New England with heavy snow intermixed, freezing rain, still dealing with some power outages in portions of Tennessee and Mississippi. A lot of those have been fixed up to this point, but unfortunately still a number of them lingering even into the thousands here on Tuesday, some week plus later. I mentioned those weak shower returns that we can see on radar, both over North Dakota and Montana. These ones here are the Midwest. I'm not seeing a lot of these make it to the ground just yet. Maybe here we can see some high returns over the last few minutes along the Ohio River, but I think a lot of this kind of evaporating before it can make its way all the way to the ground. We can kind of confirm this, at least with respect to impactful accumulations with just the Google Maps traffic here. So we aren't seeing any kind of slowdowns on the interstate here to suggest kind of inclement snow, at least to this point. I think a little bit further east, as that snow kind of continues to consolidate here this morning, we'll see a little bit of an attempt at accumulation here, but right now just kind of a weak passing snow flurries. Want to get a feel for that, so jumped over the 3-kilometer NAM high resolution forecast. I played this forecast out through this morning, 8 a.m., 9 a.m., all the way out to lunchtime. Finally, some of this better accumulating snow signal, at least from the NAM, right along the Ohio River Valley into West Virginia. Rain to the south of that, extending all the way down to the Gulf Coast, across the southern Mississippi Valley. This isn't going to be kind of a heavy extended event, more of just kind of a quick shot of rain for many folks as that pushes off to the east here. This takes us through to day tomorrow on Wednesday. And then I'll just play this forecast all the way out to the end. You can see a brief shot of upper Midwest show, but again, not kind of an extended significant snow event, maybe like we saw or have been used to earlier this winter. Catching up on current temperatures here. Let's see if we can make these valid. About 6 a.m. Central Time. Very cold air up in Minnesota, portions of Wisconsin, but the kind of brutal Arctic chill. You can see some of that over in New England as well, even into like Massachusetts and Connecticut, into portions of upstate New York. It's starting to retreat, starting to push more toward the north and east here. And that's going to continue this kind of stable climb out of these cooler temperatures that we've been seeing here over the last kind of 2 weeks of January. You can see some cold freezing lines stretching all the way back to California, portions of Nevada, and then still very cold temperatures persisting down in the southeast, maybe not quite to the magnitude they were on Sunday and Monday, but still seeing those freezing temperatures persist here at 6 a.m., now 7 a.m. Eastern time. If we look at the jet stream here this morning, it does look familiar. We have that indicative of La Niña, that wide, high amplitude jet stream splitting up into this ridge over the western U.S., kind of this washed out, diving down into a long wave trough for the east. That's keeping these little clipper systems coming through. We talked about those kind of the snow showers trying to sneak through here. And this has been a familiar pattern this year. When it amplifies, we get stronger troughs sticking through, we get bigger winter storms. But we haven't had a lot of this kind of flow tracking across the Rockies, lows ejecting out of the lee side of those, racing across the middle part of the country, bringing widespread rain, backside snow to the northern plains. We're running snow deficits, if anything, in the northern plains, and then certainly across the Intermountain West. So looking for something to change this around. Now, what's nice about, at least looking down in this view, we have some more momentum coming out of the Pacific, kind of pointed right at Kauai here. So if we jump over and show you the forecast from the ECMWF, this is looking at those jet stream level winds at 300 millibars. You can see that extension kind of pointed at Hawaii. I'm going to play this forecast forward. And you're going to see there's enough momentum there that by this weekend, we have better flow coming into the Pacific Northwest. We have a little cutoff flow here over California and Arizona that's going to sneak through. Better kind of troughing now. That ridge, if it's anywhere, it started to push east across the middle part of the country, returning warmth here over the next 6 to 7 days. That'll be a nice change of pace for folks that have been locked into that January cold. And then I'll take this forecast further. By Tuesday, a week from now, you're looking at a better, almost long wave trough here, now positioned right over California. At the very least, this would improve precipitation chances here. The only thing, negative I'll say with respect to like snowfall and precipitation is the trajectory of that trough, kind of pushing it out of the northwest to the southeast, be on the cooler side, but not the best for bringing in like a huge atmospheric river event to the west. You kind of want to see those more kind of build up out of the south to pull up that better subtropical moisture that, as you'd imagine, is living down by Hawaii. But I'll take the pattern change. We're kind of asking for this to see if we can flip around that like familiar La Niña pattern. And we're at least seeing it by next week, February 11th. If you look over the eastern U.S., broad, long wave ridge, how different is that? versus the flow that's basically done that for the last, 30 days or so. So warmth overspreading the east, more inclement precipitation, snowfall, likely coming to the western U.S. And then if we can kick off some lows here, maybe at least through the upper Midwest and the northern plains, looking at some sort of snow line in that area and some additional snowfall there. We want to take the max forecast here from the NDFD. I'm just going to take this quickly out through the next few days because by Thursday, those high temps across the plains are going to be impressive. You're looking at 60s all the way up near 70 degrees Fahrenheit for Great Falls in early February. Warmth spreading even beyond that, well across the western U.S., but starting to push into the Mississippi Valley. So 30s across the upper Midwest, if not 40s in Iowa, stretching down through Texas into the 60s. You still have that cold air settling in over the eastern U.S. If I take this forecast into Friday, Saturday, Sunday, warmth starting to spread into the southeast Florida, back up into a high temperature with a 7 in front of it, not, a 3. And if you look over to the New England, you can see still some deep cold locked into areas there, kind of missing out on this warm-up, unfortunately. But you saw that ridge starting to get further east with time, maybe even spreading in to some of these states that I can't take it all the way out there till the 11th, but some better chances for warmth overspreading much of the continental U.S. with that deeper trough settling in, if not right over the west or west coast. If we get precipitation over the forecast period, frankly, not too much to talk about in the eastern part of the country. Obviously, have that rainfall event that we talked about, that light snowfall event near the Ohio River Valley toward the mid-Atlantic, that brief clipper that we saw at the end of that NAM forecast. That spreads through the eastern Corn Belt into West Virginia by Friday, pushing through the mid-Atlantic, then New England. Again, just kind of a quick shot of light snow out of that. That kind of deepens further off coast where it's a non-issue. By this weekend, remember, we had that better flow now. Atmospheric river pushing into the northwest. It wasn't the strongest one, but we will have some snow in the inland interior mountains here, the higher elevations. Rain for the Willamette Valley, rain for Seattle, Tacoma. Additional snowfall now for the Intermountain West. Not a ton, but it's something. And now we have that flow at this point next week. Remember, finally getting that trough in. So perhaps some rain showers kind of coming on shore for California. Doesn't look like a particularly wet event for California at this time, but precipitation likely in a number of areas. Again, not the best trajectory for like an atmospheric river to come in and really spill a lot on the state, but it is something, and we will see some improvement, I think, to the snowpack as a result of the system coming through. And it looks like it's going to linger for a while, so we see one attempt next week to produce kind of a low that skirts across. The models, haven't really consolidated this yet. You can see it kind of tried to start a lee cyclone here, and that failed to kind of consolidate. Then there's this other piece that comes together later over the upper Midwest. So that's not the best signal for widespread central U.S. precipitation right now. Obviously not a huge snow swath on the backside, but I think the model's still kind of getting a handle on this pattern change here. So we'll see how this and the GFS compares as we go through next week. I'm all the way 10 days out in the forecast. So that exact kind of evolution of that low, it's not clear yet, just kind of based on how far out we are on the forecast. If we do take that 10-day forecast, turn it into a precip anomaly, it's not very impressive given that we just saw the jet stream finally flip around into a trough over the western U.S. California missing out on some more significant rain. And we do see some across the Intermountain West, just improving some precipitation there. Obviously, that low tried to consolidate over Texas. You can see some northern plains snow out of this, but still dry across much of the eastern, at least third of the country, if not the half of it. Now, if I do show you a different opinion here, the GFS has a deeper low just off California, some better Intermountain West, if not Four Corners precipitation, and then it consolidates that low a little bit faster middle of next week before it races off through the upper Midwest, so bring better precipitation chances there. Like I said, there's some uncertainty next week, where that low is exactly to develop. If it's going to kind of combine, where is that going to occur? You can imagine kind of right in here, we're going to see that low try to consolidate. We haven't seen a lot of great moisture across the southeast right now after that deep Arctic cold front kind of kicked it all out. So these systems won't have as much kind of moisture source in both regions really to produce widespread heavy rain, but the flow is there, the trigger mechanism, the low pressure system to get that convergence is there. We'll have some precip, I think, over a wide corridor here, just the details of it, not quite clear yet. But it's important, we're trying to build snowpack back into this region here, if not the Intermountain West, but all the way over into the northern plains, obviously the upper Midwest, the mid-Atlantic, the central kind of Corn Belt here has seen plenty of snow this year, but we're lacking in this area here all the way over to California, as the Four Corners region, lower and upper Colorado River valleys, the Columbia, portions of like western Montana are doing okay, but they're very localized. Portions of the Cascades doing okay, but These regions are more localized. The broad story here is a lack of precipitation across the western U.S. And if we look at the pattern and we take it out even through like the middle of February, we still see favorable conditions. So this pattern change is going to kind of stick around, I think, through the middle part of the month. And as a result of that, the Climate Prediction Center has better rain chances February 10th through the 16th for a wide area of the western U.S., kind of fading as you go west to east here. But even the central U.S., better chances than not to be above average in terms of precipitation. You can see that from the ensembles here, the ECMWF jumping over, comparing to the GFS ensemble. Just kind of broader, better chances for rainfall, at least through the northern third, northern half of the country here, through the middle part of February, even kind of extending into portions of the Mississippi Valley and down through Texas. California, unfortunately, just the trajectory of, again, that trough coming in from the west isn't great for their precipitation, but they're likely to get some, and it's possible that if it kind of works out just right, they get a little bit more than advertised from these ensemble models. See, again, the GFS has been a little stronger with that trough down to the southwest, and as a result, we're seeing more rainfall there for Southern California. So, again, the exact kind of play out of that trough as it sneaks through is yet to be kind of detailed out yet. But the favorable pattern, I think, is certainly there. If we look at temperatures over that same stretch, kind of saw that warming trend anyway. But we'll look at the panels here. So the next 5 days are on the left, comparing the three models top to bottom. So we get out into kind of this weekend and next week, the warm-up is on for the middle part of the country, certainly the plains. We looked at those temperatures flying up into the 60s, if not the 70s in portions of the plains, and spreading further east as we go out further into February here, the middle part of the month. I mentioned I couldn't drag that NDFD forecast all the way into next week, but let's just take the ECMWF ensemble. Look at the warmth. Finally, warmth across the Hudson Bay. How big of a pattern change is that, where we've had these deep, tropospheric polar vortex troughs kind of backdooring into this part of the country? This is the opposite pattern, with a trough out west, better precipitation chances here, better chances for heat, and then a low track kind of riding into that heat there somewhere over the central or the northern plains here as we go through the middle part of the month. So this is that February pattern change we were waiting on, and we're seeing the kind of results come out of it now in the long range forecast. It's becoming more clear. Looking out beyond that, trying to point to the end of February here. Well, if we look at the MJO as a guide, Eric mentioned this yesterday, we're finally seeing some support for this phase 2, 3, maybe 4 extension of the MJO. At least this particular model run showing maybe an attempt back toward null space before it gets all the way over to Indonesia. I'm not so sure about that right now. I'll show you why in just a second here. But either way, seeing this transition through phase 8, 1, 2, and 3 through the middle part of the month here, and then ultimately into the end of February. So kind of curious where we're going to end up. Are we going to be out here by February 23rd? Are we going to be phase 2, maybe 2, still transitioning to 3, kind of waiting on a potential pattern change? I think at the end of the month, perhaps if anything, back toward cold weather. Now, comparing the last two analogs, Eric and I have been kind of going back on for this year in 2026, just in terms of sea surface temperatures, where we're at with La Niña, where we might be going with El Nino. And this next growing season, 14 and 18 have stood out. And February to March, those years, temperature anomalies-wise, were colder across the northern part of the country. That does make sense. We had La Niñas in those years, so you get that kind of northwest flow pattern that can help bring colder air into this region. But again, that kind of background, that ambient, broader support is still there, I think, for cold air to dive into the middle part of the country at the end of February and let's say the beginning of March, just based on where we're at now with this warm up through mid-February. So that is something I'm going to be keeping an eye on. We've seen some support from the stratospheric vortex that, if that's weakening, that might allow better conditions for that as well. So just something we're watching in late February. But in the meantime, the warm up, I think, is on. Speaking of the warm-up, we're still kind of coming out of the peak of the solar cycle here. You've probably seen the aurora, if not just seeing it directly, seeing it more in the news over the last 2 years. And the result of that has been we've peaked in our 11-year solar cycle in the last year or two here. So we're still kind of coming down off that peak. We're still seeing a lot of sunspot activity from the sun as a result of that. And that's relevant this week as we have a decent, kind of menacing-looking sunspot here. See that kind of pulsating, flaring over the sun here as it rounds, kind of pointed more so at Earth. So we've seen this one pretty active here as it came around the limb over the last few days, kind of getting itself into position, staring down the Earth and kind of waiting to see, is this going to produce one of those CMEs that could produce another geomagnetic storm? Are we going to have more auroras at the end of this week or next week as a result of that? So I'm keeping my eye on that sunspot here over the next few days. If you just Google solar weather, you can get to the space weather Prediction Center from NOAA. There's a million links in here. You can find these observations from the sun and the different wavelengths here. And it's kind of neat to look at these. I'm not going to pretend to know what all these different wavelengths mean, but they certainly look pretty darn cool, and you can certainly see that sunspot kind of flaring up there. So I'm going to have to keep an eye on that over the next few days. Again, I think the chances for another aurora show are at least a little bit elevated while that comes around. There's that high resolution of that sunspot region that you can see there. We see more of these sunspots at the peak of the solar cycle that we're in now. If I jump over and show you where we're at, again, maybe peaked in 24 into 25, but here early 26, we're still kind of in that peak region and maybe seeing a last gasp of heightened activity from the sun as that sunspot comes around. If you look to the past, you can see that 11-year solar cycle really well. The last peak, kind of beginning of last decade, going back to the early 2000s before that. We've analyzed this in a number of different ways, along with a lot of other people, trying to find out, is there a link here with our weather? Can you try to predict North American drought or floods with the solar cycle? And no matter how we cut it, we don't end up finding very good correlations between the solar cycle and at least impactful weather here in North America, or really much of anywhere else. Now, the difference in kind of total solar radiation actually getting to the Earth is really small, strangely, between the peaks of the solar cycle here. You're talking like 0.1%. Now, you could argue, is there a butterfly effect where that 0.1% of solar radiation end up changing, things in a bigger way downstream? Well, it's possible, but we're just not seeing it in a predictable way. Like kind of one example I could do, I correlated this solar activity here with precipitation in North America from June through August. So just trying to see, is there like a summer drought signal when that solar cycle peaks or valleys? Do you see a strong drought signal or flood signal either way? And this was the result. This map, it couldn't be more uncertain or less clear in terms of a correlation pointing in one direction or the other. Now, these are correlation values, so you're talking like, maybe 0.1, 0.2 over the Dakotas, a little bit more summer rainfall during these solar cycles. I guess we saw some of that last year and a few years before that. But again, like to point at that, the sun being the cause of that and not just, happenstance thunderstorms rolling through in those years, it's not possible to make any sort of jump right now looking at the data that I can see looking at a map like this. If we just look at temperature, you actually see a little bit more. Kind of curiously, those correlation values getting a little bit closer to like maybe 0.2, 0.3. Again, even those aren't very impressive, but it makes sense that temperature might be a little bit better correlated just because you're actually changing the irradiance. But again, 0.1% coming all the way down to the sun. If I try to use the fact that we're coming off a peak as like an analog here, just kind of using the same kind of logic, strangely, that we did with like La Niña into El Nino, I went back through the solar cycle again, just kind of trying to cherry pick some sort of pattern here. And I picked every year where it was the next year off the peak. So this peak, let's just call it 2025. I picked 2026 because that's where we're at now. So the last one peaked in 2014. So I looked at summer of 2015. Last peak before that, I took that kind of max peak there in 2002. So I took the summer of 2023. Again, did the same thing, got 92. I think I picked out 1981 and then 1971. Again, that kind of 11-year solar cycle jumping out in those years that I picked. And in doing so, I went back, pulled up a map of summer precipitation, June to August. All those years I picked, there's 03, 15, 92, 81, and 71. This is precipitation anomalies, so the blue color is where we had more precipitation than not. And here with a map that looked like this. So not a strong indicator. Again, these are only 5 years. That's not a wide sample size, so it's easy to see these just, the variation you can see in here. It's hard to say it was just because we were coming down off the peak of the solar cycle. It could have been any number of things this year. It could have been a late season hurricane that came through South Carolina into Georgia. I'd have to go investigate, what exactly caused this. But, certainly don't see a widespread drought signal from anything like this with respect to that, like 1 year off the peak solar cycle. Maybe, something there over southwest Wisconsin. But again, to say the sun caused this little localized area of a lack of precipitation in just a 5-year sample, it's just a hard stretch right now. We do kind of keep an eye on it. The images certainly look cool, but at least right now, not too much to go off of, I think, in 2026. Last thing I want to kind of cover here, what I think might matter a little bit more is that La Niña situation, which we've been talking about, obviously using it in our analogs for 2018 and 2014. A lot of the videos I did roughly 2 weeks ago, kind of before this winter weather really kicked into high gear, was showing you that we had some weakness in the trade winds here over the Central Pacific. We can still see a little bit of that, this kind of Southern Pacific convergence zone here, but by and large, the trade winds have resurged east to west, increased in strength almost in a La Niña-like look here over the last week or so. You can see that nicely, those strong trade winds right across the Central Pacific, kind of right where we're looking and measuring La Niña. And so we've seen a bit of a resurgence of that here. As a result of that, I think the slight rise that we've seen in the Niña 3.4 index is going to level off, if not come back down a little bit as we go through February here. That kind of easterly wind burst, that trade wind burst, is impressive. It's expected to last for some time. If we jump over and look at the ECMWF forecast here, this is the AIFS ensemble, and it shows even out through kind of the middle part of February. Trade winds surging in those blue colors through the forecast, which is down on these graphics. So out to February 18th, plenty of trade wind activity right across the Central Pacific, different than what we saw at the end of January. We had a westerly wind burst. So you can kind of see this back and forth, almost like sloshing waves back and forth. And so La Niña getting a little bit of a resurgence here, but curious in March, if we see more of these, if more of these kind of cut through that, either near the end of February or early March, again, those are kind of signals that El Nino might be working its way in. So at least in the meantime, that'll have to wait. We'll keep an eye on where we head with this La Nina. The only thing I'll say that if we get these strong surges all the way out through the middle to end of February here, you think at the nose of those trade winds is necessarily convergence. You can kind of see that here. If you're moving quickly here and you put on the brakes here, you're going to have kind of a traffic jam right here. And that traffic jam, that convergence in the lower atmosphere where those trade winds live, could help to support better MJO activity at the nose of it. So like here, like phase 4 and 5. And that's kind of lining up a little bit with what we've seen from the MJO forecast heading out further out. I was able to find it. Sometimes those get lost up there in the tabs. So it wouldn't surprise me by the end of February. That's why I said maybe phase 4, maybe phase 5, which actually get out into early March, actually support a little bit better warmth over the eastern U.S. Maybe not like the northern plains. We saw some of those analogs going cooler, but those certainly are kind of on the warmer side of the MJO phases, we think, at least persisting into winter and then spring here. I'll leave it there today. As for today, thanks for watching. Eric will be back with you all tomorrow.